How do you grieve something you've never had but spent your whole life waiting for? We're going to discuss this amongst other topics as we continue our conversation on grief.
Before we begin, welcome to Unapologetically Reborn. This isn't a podcast about quick fixes, positive thinking, or pretending the past didn't happen. These conversations are designed to challenge the way you understand yourself, your relationships, your nervous system, and the survival strategies that shaped your life. The goal of this podcast is to translate trauma into language that makes sense, so you can better understand your experiences, recognize your patterns, and explore yourself with greater clarity and compassion. This podcast is intended for educational and personal growth purposes. It is not a substitute for therapy, mental health treatment, medical care, or crisis support. If you find yourself becoming emotionally overwhelmed, please consider pausing the episode, practicing self-care, and reaching out to a qualified mental health professional for additional support. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about understanding who survival required you to become, and discovering who you are underneath the armor. If you're ready to have honest conversations, ask difficult questions, and explore what it truly means to heal, welcome to Unapologetically Reborn. This is where survival ends and choices begin.
Told you.
Welcome to Unapologetically Reborn. I am Alicia Lynch.
I'm Cody.
So now we are up to episode 3 with grief. We didn't want to keep you too much last time. We went up to 32 minutes, and I believe the first episode we were at like 40 something. So apparently we're going to do this in increments. Yeah. So because this is such a deep subject,
That's a lot.
This is what's confusing about a podcast for me. So in some senses, I suppose you could critique this and be like, oh, it's a crash course in whatever subject. But I really, really don't like to half-ass it. You know what I mean? And just put like 5 things in there. And then there's like this whole big thing that is really, in my opinion, worth discussing. Because I feel like the people that come here, you're not coming here to watch TikToks and watch people shake their ass. You're coming here to work on your healing, and cognitively that requires a lot of information. And
I might not speak a lot, but I ain't shaking that ass. I don't get paid enough for that.
Well, that's all fine, dandy, and fun for whomever, but the truth of the matter is you go ahead and shut this off because it's boring to you. Go watch TikTok videos, watch people lip sync, watch people walk on milk crates, drink, whatever, eat cinnamon, whatever little dumb shit they're doing. But the bottom line is that's not going to help you. If you truly want to heal, this is where you'll be. Boring, not boring, long, whatever,
Shit, the only thing that's not is going to heal is nothing. You're going to eat the hottest pepper, guess what? You're in the bathroom. We're not here to tell you things.
Well, I'm hoping we can wrap this up in today's session, and maybe we'll go over a little bit, but I can't guarantee and I can't promise you anything. So hopefully that's the case. We'll see where this goes. I believe your question is up.
Yep. What if someone judges my success without understanding what it took for me to survive?
All right. Well, this is deep. I've dealt with this, and it's not a fun. It kind of triggers you, actually. I guess it depends on who you are, but at least it has for me. So their comparison may be incomplete. So success isn't meaning, without context. So someone else's timeline doesn't establish what yours should have been. This is what I've learned. So this adds another painful dimension to grief. So being judged by someone who compares outcomes while ignoring starting conditions. A person can already be grieving what their past cost them. And then someone else uses these consequences as evidence that they're somehow less capable, less successful, less disciplined, or less worthy. When someone compares their life to yours without comparing what it took to get there, two people can be the same age and have had radically different developmental starting points. Think of that. So one person may have grown up with stability, encouragement, financial help, emotional support, adults who showed up, opportunities, and basic beliefs of, I can probably figure this out. Another person may have spent those same developmental years dealing with instability, neglect, addiction in the home, abuse, poverty, caregiving, responsibilities, loss, or simply trying to stay emotionally safe. And then adulthood arrives and society puts their accomplishments side by side as though they were running in the same race. Look where I am. Why haven't you accomplished this? I bought a house at your age. I finished college. My marriage worked. I raised my kids differently. I would never have made that choice that you made. Maybe, but you don't actually know what choices you would have made from inside somebody else's life. And that's the part that comparison conveniently leaves out. So when someone repeatedly throws their successes in your face, that can reopen the grief, because perhaps you're already thinking, and I wonder what I could have accomplished if things had been different. And now someone else is effectively saying, see, I accomplished more than you did. And instead of seeing your circumstances, they use your consequences against you. And that can create anger, humiliation, shame, resentment.
Oh, I can think of one person on that one.
And sometimes an intense need to prove yourself. Yeah, I hear you. That's what popped in my head too. And I could go on my little soapbox about that, but this is what I've learned anyway. So now you're no longer pursuing things because you want them. So you're pursuing them because I'll show you. I'll prove I'm smart. I'll prove I'm successful. I'll prove I'm not a failure. I'll prove that I'm just as good as you. And that can become another way that the past continues controlling your identity. So trauma can turn comparison into a threat to worth. And this is back to authenticity. So if somebody already struggles with, am I enough? And then a competitive or a judgmental person can become an external voice reinforcing an internal wound. They can trigger you big time. Their accomplishments stop being information about their life and they start feeling like evidence about your worth. They're married, I'm failing. They earn more, I'm behind. They have a degree, I'm not intelligent. Their children reached a milestone, I did something wrong. They're confident, I'm weak. But those conclusions don't logically follow. Someone else's accomplishments is not evidence of your inadequacy. So there can also be grief over never being acknowledged. And this could be the deeper wound. Sometimes you don't even want the person to say you did better. You want them to acknowledge, you had a hard road and it was harder than mine. It's not an excuse. It's not as pity. Just recognition. I see what you carried. I understand why certain things were harder. I recognize how much effort it took you to get there. And when someone refuses to acknowledge that, especially while criticizing the outcome, it can feel profoundly invalidating, because you're thinking you're judging the finished product without acknowledging what went into surviving long enough to build it. The ultimate healing challenge is refusing the competition. This is hard. And this is where you can make a huge difference in your life. So at first, someone may desperately want to win. Not everybody, but let's just say this motivates someone. I'll become more successful. I'll make more money. I'll lose weight. I'll get the degree. And then they finally realize that they underestimated me. But if your healing depends only upon eventually beating the person who made you feel inferior, then that person's still determining the scoreboard. Fuck them. No, I'm kidding.
Depends on the person, but...
Anyway.
Depends on the person.
Freedom is being able to say, I don't need to outperform you to prove that what I survived mattered. And maybe even you don't have to understand how hard my road was for me to stop being ashamed of how long it took me to travel it. Grief for the versions of yourself who spent years believing they had to accomplish enough to finally become worthy in somebody else's eyes. And eventually healing asks a very different question. Not have I done as much as you, but given the life that I've actually lived, not the life I'm comparing it to, what do I want my life to mean from here? A different grief than simple jealousy or comparison can be grief over unequal opportunities, realizing that the ability and the outcome aren't the same thing. So someone can look at another person and they can think, you weren't smarter than me. You weren't more talented than me. You weren't more capable than me. But you had room to develop those things. And I was busy surviving. This realization can hurt like hell. They got to become successful. And I was just as capable. Two children can have similar intelligence, creativity, ambition, or potential, and enter completely different environments. One gets encouragement. You should apply. We'll help you. You can do this. What do you want to become? The other may be dealing with chaos, instability, caregiving, fear, addiction in the family, neglect, abuse, financial instability, or simply nobody noticing what they're capable of. One person spends adolescence building a future. The other spends it managing the present. And then they're adults. One has credentials, connections, confidence, financial stability, a career, trajectory, perhaps family support. The other may finally be reaching the point where they can ask, what do I actually want? And then society looks at the outcomes and says, well, they worked hard. Maybe they absolutely did, but so did the other person. Effort doesn't always produce something you can put on a resume. Sometimes tremendous effort went into staying functional. And this is where the grief becomes, I could have done that, not I deserved their success. Instead, I deserve the opportunity to find out what I could have done. That's the loss. And there's an important distinction. You cannot know that you definitely would have achieved the same success, but you can grieve that circumstances may have prevented you from ever getting a fair chance to discover your potential. And that's much more psychologically honest than claiming an alternative life would certainly have been better. And then imagine that person judging you. This connects directly to what we talked about. The successful person says, look what I've accomplished. You could have done it too. We all make choices. I worked for everything I have. And perhaps you're sitting there thinking, you had the luxury of making choices about your future while I was making choices about survival. Again, that doesn't just, diminish their accomplishments. Their success can be legitimate, and your disadvantage can also be legitimate. Those truths don't compete. But what becomes cruel is when somebody uses their outcome as evidence of superiority. I succeeded, therefore I'm more capable than you. No. Success tells us something about what someone accomplished. It does not provide a scientific measurement of what every other person could have accomplished under equivalent circumstances. This can create a grief over unrealized potential because perhaps the person isn't grieving a specific career. They don't know what they would have become. They're grieving. I never got to find out. Maybe they could have been extraordinary at something. Maybe they would have been average. Maybe they would have changed careers 5 times. That's not the point. The loss is so much of my energy went towards surviving that I didn't have enough left over to explore what and who I could become. And that can generate rage. It can also create an obsession with catching up. This is another direction. Once people realize this, they sometimes start running. I have to make up for lost time. I have to accomplish something. I have to prove I'm intelligent. I have to become successful. I have to show everybody what I could have been. And suddenly healing becomes another performance. You're no longer trying to survive your childhood. You're trying to outrun it. And that's exhausting too. Because there's no point at which an accomplishment can retroactively give your younger self the opportunities they didn't have. A degree can't do it. Money can't. A successful business can't. Recognition can't. Those things can be meaningful and wonderful now. They can't rewrite them. And that's why this belongs in grief. I wasn't less capable. I had less capacity. I had less capacity available for becoming, because ability and available capacity aren't identical. Someone can have an enormous potential while having a very little psychological, financial, relational, or practical bandwidth available to develop it. And I think the healthiest destination isn't, I would have been more successful than you, because then we're still trapped inside the comparison. It's, your success does not prove my inferiority, and my struggles do not prove that I lacked potential. Then comes the grief. I deserve the chance to discover what I could have become. And finally, the present. I didn't get every chance deserved then. What chances can I give myself now? That doesn't erase the unfairness. It stops somebody else's life from becoming the measuring stick for yours.
Oh, sorry. How do you know if what you're feeling is actually grief?
All right, so I think I said this before.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to picture grief as sadness after someone dies. Grief is a response to loss. Loss can involve a person, relationship, identity, an identity role, an opportunity, the sense of safety, belonging, health, future, childhood, or something that never happened at all. And that means grief can show up emotionally, cognitively, physically, behaviorally, and relationally. And it doesn't always announce itself. Hello, I'm grief. Sometimes it says, I'm angry.
Damn.
I don't care anymore. Why does everyone else get that? I can't stop thinking about what happened. I just want to be left alone. I should be further along by now. I don't know who I am anymore. So here are some signs. Longing and yearning. This may be one of the clearest signs of grief. And you don't have to be longing for a person who died. You might long for the mother that you needed, the father who never became emotionally available, the family you wanted, the marriage that you thought you had, the career you never pursued, the person you were before something happened, the person you believed you might have become. Sometimes people don't even know what they're longing for. They just feel something is missing. That persistent ache deserves attention. 2, anger that feels bigger than the immediate situation. So anger is enormously important in grief. Someone doesn't invite you somewhere and you're furious. Someone talks about their supportive parents and you become irritated. Someone complains about something that seems trivial, and you think you have no idea how lucky you are. Sometimes the present event is touching an older loss. The anger may be saying, I needed that too. Why didn't anyone do that for me? Why did I have to struggle so much? Why wasn't anybody there? Why did this happen to me? Why am I the one who has to fix what somebody else broke? Anger doesn't necessarily mean someone's failing at grief. Sometimes anger is grief protesting what cannot be changed. Number 3, irritability. Grief doesn't always produce dramatic emotion. Sometimes everything simply gets on your nerves. Noise, questions, people wanting things.
Yep.
Small inconveniences.
Yep.
Someone talking too much.
Yep.
Hopefully you're not talking about me. This is a podcast.
No.
Your tolerance becomes much lower than usual.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, why am I so irritated lately? Because carrying grief consumes emotional capacity. Sometimes irritability is what exhaustion and sadness look like when there is no room left for either. Did you want to touch on that?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm fine.
All right.
Irritable, but I'm fine.
Number 4, rumination. We've discussed rumination. Replaying the past. This is a big one for the type of grief that we're talking about. What if I'd known sooner that if I'd done, whatever, or I've gone, what if I would have gone to college? What if I'd left earlier? What if someone had protected me? What if my dad had lived longer? What if my mom had gotten help? What if I understood trauma at 25 instead of 60? The mind keeps returning to alternative versions of history, not necessarily because it believes it can change them. Sometimes the brain is trying to make sense of an irreversible loss. And this is why grief can contain so many if-onlys. Number 5, comparing your life to other people's lives. Okay, so you see somebody with supportive parents, a close family.
Damn them.
You have a close family. A successful career, a stable marriage, financial security.
Yeah.
Long-term friendships, confidence, and something inside of you hurts. Sometimes it's comparison. Sometimes comparison isn't simply envy. It can expose grief. And that's something that I wanted, or I wonder who I would have been if I had what they had. Someone else's life can become a mirror reflecting what you believe you lost or never received. And then comparison can become painful very quickly. Number 6, feeling jealous or resentful. When others receive care, people may be ashamed of this one. Your friend's mother shows up immediately when she's struggling. Someone's father helps them. Someone's sibling calls constantly. A person's family rallies around them after a death. And instead of simply feeling happy for them, you feel something sharp. And then, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy for them? Maybe you are happy for them, and you're grieving for yourself simultaneously. Sometimes jealousy contains, I wanted that too. Feeling numb. Number 7. People often think if I were grieving, I'd be crying, but not necessarily. Some people feel almost nothing. They function, they work, they take care of everyone. They watch television, they scroll their phone, they handle responsibilities and feel strangely disconnected. So numbness can be part of grief, particularly when the emotional load feels overwhelming. It doesn't necessarily mean you didn't care. Sometimes it means your system doesn't have the capacity to feel everything at once. Number 8, staying constantly busy. This can look extremely productive. Work, projects, cleaning, helping everyone. Yeah. Always having somewhere to go. Never sitting still, because stillness creates space. And sometimes space allows grief to become audible. So I'm just a busy person might occasionally deserve another question. What happens inside me when I stop? Not everyone who stays busy is avoiding grief, of course, but for some people, productivity becomes an emotional anesthetic. Number 9, withdrawal. Withdrawal and isolation. So grief can create the opposite response. Stop answering messages, decline invitations, stay home, avoid conversations, feel exhausted by social interaction, think nobody understands anyway. This becomes particularly important with relational grief because isolation can reinforce the original wound. I feel abandoned. I withdraw. I become more isolated. My isolation feels like further evidence that nobody cares. That's another consequential grief cycle.
So many cycles.
Tons. All right, number 10, becoming hyper-independent. This one can easily be mistaken for personality. I don't need anybody. I'll figure it out myself.
Damn right.
Don't worry about me, I'm fine. Sometimes independence develops around grief. I needed people before and they didn't come. So instead of grieving that absence, the person builds an identity around never needing anyone again. Hyper-independence can be grief wearing armor. Number 11, overgiving and caretaking. Another person responds on the opposite direction, so they become indispensable. Remember everyone's birthday. Check on everybody. Solve everyone's problems. Give more than they have, and somewhere underneath, maybe if I become more valuable, then maybe nobody will leave. Or I'll give people the care that I desperately wish someone would have given me. That can be beautiful generosity. But when it becomes compulsive or one-sided, it's worth asking what need the giving is carrying. Number 12, sensitivity to rejection. So I know I've used this example quite a bit, but a text isn't returned. Someone's tone changes. You're not invited. A friend seems distracted. A relative posts pictures with somebody else, and emotionally it becomes enormous. Why?
Assholes.
Because the present event may be touching accumulated grief, not chosen again. That's why the reaction can feel bigger than the event. The person isn't necessarily reacting only to Tuesday. Tuesday just opened a door to 20 years of Tuesdays. Number 13, searching for explanations. Grief can make people obsessed with why. Why did they leave? Why didn't she love me differently? Why didn't anyone help? Why didn't I know? Why didn't somebody tell me? Why wasn't I included? Why couldn't he stop using? Why did this happen to our family? Sometimes there's an answer and sometimes there isn't. And the mind can keep searching because it believes if I understand it completely, maybe it will hurt less. Sometimes understanding helps enormously, but explanation cannot always restore what was lost, and that's part of grief too. Bargaining, number 14. So we usually associate bargaining with death, if only I'd, but it appears in relational grief too. Maybe if I explain it differently, she'll understand. Maybe if I'm more patient, he'll change. Maybe if I become successful, they'll finally respect me. Maybe if I'm easier to love, they'll stay. Maybe if I forgive enough, we'll finally have the relationship I wanted. Bargaining can keep maybe someday alive. And when the person finally realizes someday may never come, grief begins to intensify. 15, guilt. Grief is full of I should have, I shouldn't have. Why didn't I? If only I'd known. People judge past versions of themselves using information they only gained later. So someone at 51 looks at something they didn't at 21 and they think, how could I have made that choice? But the 21-year-old didn't possess the 51-year-old's insight. Grief can make us unfair historians out of our own lives.
Damn right it can.
Mm-hmm. Number 16, shame. Guilt says, I wish I'd done something differently. Shame says, there's something wrong with me. Loss can become shame when someone concludes they left. I'm unlovable. Nobody came. I'm not important. I wasn't protected. I wasn't worth protecting. My needs weren't met. I'm too needy. My family excludes me. Something about me makes people not want me. And that's... Go
My
ahead.
family does that too. I'm not wanted.
Oh, yeah. So not true.
Hurtful.
You want to elaborate?
No.
Smartass. That's why grief work sometimes requires separating what happened from what I decided it meant about me. So number 17, difficulty experiencing joy. Sometimes people can still laugh and have good days while grieving. Other times, joy feels muted. Things that once mattered don't. Achievement feels strangely empty. Someone accomplishes something they worked years for and thinks, why don't I feel happier? Sometimes grief occupies so much psychological space that pleasure becomes harder to access. And sometimes joy itself produces guilt. How can I be happy after what happened?
We're down to 31 minutes.
18, physical signs. Grief isn't purely psychological. People may experience changes in sleeping, appetite, energy, concentration, restlessness, muscle tension, headaches, digestive symptoms, or a general sense of physical heaviness. Those symptoms aren't specific to grief, but they can have many causes. So persistent or concerning physical changes deserve medical attention. But it's worth looking at. Grief can be experienced in the body as well as the mind. 19, forgetfulness and difficulty concentrating. This one is very scary. You walk into a room and you forget why. You have to read something repetitively because you just can't retain the information. Losing your train of thought, difficulty making decisions, feeling mentally fogged. Grief can consume enormous cognitive bandwidth. Part of the brain is processing something major while you're simultaneously trying to function normally. Identity confusion, number 20. This one is essential for grieving the person that you had to become. I don't know who I am anymore. Sometimes the loss removes a role: wife, husband, daughter, caregiver, employee, parent, members of a family, partner. Other times, healing itself creates identity disruption. If I'm not the caretaker, who am I? If I stop pleasing everyone, who am I? If I don't have to survive anymore, what do I do? If what I believed about myself wasn't true, then who am I? That's grief and identity reconstruction happening simultaneously. So the loss of self-trust. When you learn to look outside yourself for reality, children don't enter the world with a fully developed understanding of themselves. They learn partly through experience and partly through relationship. They feel something, communicate, and then they look to caregivers for help making sense of it. So ideally, there's enough consistency between the child's internal experiences and the adult's response that the child gradually learns. I can notice what happens inside me. My feelings give me information. My body gives me information. I can ask questions when I'm confused. My interpretation may sometimes be wrong, but I'm allowed to have one. And that's an important distinction. Healthy caregiving doesn't teach everything that you feel is automatically true. It teaches your internal experience is worth listening to and exploring. But imagine repetitively experiencing the opposite. It hurts. No, it doesn't. This can happen emotionally or physically. The child says something hurts. Instead of curiosity, they're told, you're fine. Stop being dramatic. That wasn't a big deal. You're too sensitive. Eventually, the question becomes, maybe I shouldn't trust my own experiences of pain. And then adulthood arrives. Someone hurts them emotionally. Their first reaction might be, that hurt. But immediately, maybe I'm overreacting. Notice what happened? The emotion appeared. And then an internalized voice overruled it. And that's how invalidation can eventually become self-invalidation. Nobody has to tell you anymore that your pain isn't legitimate. You start doing it automatically. Something feels wrong. You're overreacting. Children sometimes notice tension before they understand it. They notice facial expressions, tone, body language, behavior. They may sense that something's wrong. Sometimes their interpretation will be inaccurate. Children are children, but if their perceptions are repeatedly dismissed rather than explored, they may learn my instincts aren't reliable, and that can become complicated later. Someone enters an unhealthy relationship and feels uncomfortable, but maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe this is normal. Maybe I'm creating problems again. And sometimes people override legitimate warning signs because they've learned that discomfort itself isn't enough reason to stop and investigate. The goal isn't teaching someone to treat every anxiety feeling as a danger. Every anxious feeling that you have doesn't mean that it's danger, but it's helping you learn. So when something feels wrong, you're allowed to become curious about why. That's self-trust. I remember what happened. That's not how it happened. This one can be profoundly destabilizing. Memory isn't, it's imperfect. Two people genuinely can remember the same event differently. But when someone's recollection is chronically dismissed, especially within a power imbalanced relationship, they can begin doubting their ability to know what they've experienced. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. Maybe I exaggerated. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I misunderstood. And eventually, maybe I can't trust myself. That's bigger than doubting one memory. It can create dependence on another person's interpretations. Tell me what happened. Tell me whether I should be upset. Tell me whether I'm being reasonable. Tell me what this means. The person starts outsourcing reality. I'm angry about how you treated me. You're the problem. This is where judgment can become compromised. Anger often tells us something matters. A boundary may have been crossed. Something feels unfair. Anger doesn't automatically mean our interpretation is correct, and it doesn't justify harmful behavior, but it deserves examination. So if every expression of anger is reframed as you're difficult, you're ungrateful, you're selfish, you're too sensitive, then the child may stop asking, was that okay? And start asking, what's wrong with me for being upset? That's an enormous shift. So now the person who crossed the boundary isn't being examined. Their reaction to the boundary violation is. And the child learns, my anger is evidence against me. I need comfort. You're too needy. This teaches something beyond, I'm not going to receive comfort. It can teach the fact that I want comfort is evidence that something is wrong with me. So eventually the adult doesn't ask. They need reassurance, but stay silent. They want somebody to sit with them, but say, I'm fine. They want help, but they feel embarrassed requesting it. And when somebody does provide comfort, they may immediately feel guilty of being a burden. The unmet need has now become a disowned need. That's a much deeper loss. If your internal world repetitively, boy, I can talk, receives the message wrong, then you start looking outward for the answer. Instead of, how do I feel about this? You ask, how should I feel? Instead of, do I like this? You ask, do they like it? Instead of, was that hurtful? You ask, would everybody else think that that was hurtful? Instead of, do I want this? You ask, what am I supposed to want? Instead of, is this relationship working for me? You ask, am I asking for too much? Instead of, did they treat me poorly? You ask, what did I do to cause it? And eventually you may become incredibly dependent upon reassurance. Not because you're incapable of thinking, but because you learned that your own answer required external verification. This can create chronic reassurance seeking. Do you think they're mad at me? Was I wrong? Does this text sound rude? Do you think I'm overreacting? Would you be upset?
Yep.
What would you do? Do you think I'm a bad person? Are you sure? Reassurance brings temporary relief. Someone says, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Relief. Then another situation occurs and you need another external verdict. Why? Because reassurance is being used as a substitute for internal authority. That's why. Reassurance sometimes never feels like enough. The deeper need isn't another answer. It's learning I can evaluate my own experience. It can also make someone extremely vulnerable to confident people. This can also become very consequential. So if I don't trust my interpretation and you seem absolutely certain about yours, I may automatically assume that you must be right, especially if you become angry or withdraw or accuse me of being selfish or tell me that I'm remembering incorrectly. Your certainty becomes more persuasive than my own internal experience. So now imagine what that can, mean in unhealthy relationships. A person may repetitively, however you want to say that, abandon their own perception simply because the other person speaks with more confidence. Maybe they're right. That's one reason rebuilding self-trust matters so much. You could start explaining yourself endlessly. This is another behavior that can come from self-doubt. So if someone misunderstands you, you don't simply clarify once. You desperately need them to understand your intention. So you explain, and then explain the explanation, and then provide context, and then worry that the context sounded defensive, and then send another message. Because being misunderstood doesn't simply feel unpleasant. It can feel like if you believe something bad about me, maybe your interpretation becomes reality. And that makes enormous sense when someone's identity has historically been shaped by other people's interpretations. This was a real hard one for me to get to, but I learned this. I used to suffer from this too. Decision making. This can become exhausting. If you don't trust yourself, even ordinary decisions can become stressful. Which one should I choose? What would you do? Do you think this is okay? Am I making a mistake? You gather opinions from 5 people. 3 say A, 2 say B. Now you're more confused because the question underneath isn't really which option is objectively perfect. It's, can I survive making the wrong choice? People with stronger self-trust can make decisions and think, I may be wrong, but I'll deal with it. Someone who doesn't trust themselves may think, if I choose wrong, it proves I shouldn't trust myself. So every decision becomes a test of identity. And this can create a strange relationship with experts and authority. Someone who has learned to outsource reality may believe other people inherently know more about their own internal experiences than they do, such as doctors, therapists, teachers, partners, parents, friends, Experts absolutely have valuable knowledge in their area of expertise, but healthy help should ideally increase someone's ability to understand themselves, not require them to permanently surrender their internal authority. Remember that. So if you choose to go to a counselor, their job isn't to tell you what you should do. They can help direct you. They can help clarify some things. They can help. I guess what I'm trying to say is their job is to help you be able to figure these things out on your own and in your own independence. So a good therapeutic relationship, for an example, isn't I'll tell you what your life means. It's much closer to let's help you understand your experience and make informed choices. And then healing itself can become confusing because suddenly you're told, trust yourself. And the person thinks, how? That's like telling someone, speak a language that nobody taught you. Self-trust isn't a switch. It has to be practiced. You notice something. You make an interpretation. You gather information. You tolerate uncertainty. You make a decision. You observe what happens. And sometimes you're right. And sometimes you're wrong. And slowly you learn something important. Being wrong occasionally doesn't mean that I'm incapable of trusting myself. Self-trust doesn't mean I'm always right. It means I trust myself to listen, evaluate, learn, repair, reconsider, and respond. That's much healthier. And this is also where cognitive distortions become relevant. Because rebuilding self-trust doesn't mean automatically believing every thought. So our minds can catastrophize, personalize, mind read, emotionally reason, overgeneralize. That's why the goal isn't everything I think and feel is true. It's everything I think and feel deserves enough attention to be examined. That's a huge difference. You can say I feel abandoned and then ask, am I actually being abandoned? Or did something activate an old abandonment wound? You're not dismissing the feeling, you're investigating it. That's self-trust with discernment. And this becomes another grief, because once someone rebuilds even a little self-trust, they may look backward and think, how many times did I know? How many times did something hurt and I talked myself out of it? How many times did I sense something wasn't right? How many times did I stay because somebody convinced me I was overreacting? How many decisions did I make based upon what everybody else wanted? How many times did I apologize when I wasn't actually wrong? How many needs did I silence because someone called them unreasonable? How much of myself did I abandon because I trusted everybody's interpretation except my own? That's grief. And again, understanding doesn't restore these moments, but it can change what happens next. This connects directly to the person that you did not become. If you're constantly looking outside yourself for reality, authenticity becomes almost impossible. Because authenticity requires access to how do I feel? What do I believe? What matters to me? What do I want? What do I need? What are my boundaries? What feels right for my life? If those questions are always answered by someone else, eventually you can wake up and think, whose life am I living? And that's exactly where identity grief enters. So we're going to summarize this up because I know we've gone over time a good close to 15 minutes. Of course, we're still not done. Another episode, not to overwhelm anyone, but I promise you, this is really good information that's helpful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have continued this conversation. But I think the core message A child's inner world doesn't need to be treated as infallible. Children they misunderstand things. Adults misunderstand things. But there's a tremendous difference between teaching a child, let's figure out what you're experiencing, and teaching them your experience is wrong. One builds discernment. The other can build self-doubt. And eventually the child may become the adult who needs a committee meeting before they're allowed to trust their own pain. Sometimes we grieve losing trust in other people, but one of the most consequential losses can be losing trust in ourselves. Because when you lose trust in yourself, you don't only lose confidence, you lose access to your emotions, your needs, your boundaries, your judgment, your voice, your choices, and ultimately your sense of who you are. And then healing isn't about becoming someone who never doubts themselves. It's about becoming someone who can finally say, I may not always interpret everything perfectly, but I'm allowed to listen to myself. My experience deserves my attention, and I no longer need someone else's permission before I believe that something matters to me. Anything you want to add?
Nope.
All right, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for watching Unapologetically Reborn. This is where survival ends and choices begin.